September 8, 1984, a teenage boy drove from his home in Concord, California, across the Bay Bridge into San Francisco. He had planned to spend the night and return home Sunday evening. Monday, September 10th, 3 days later, on some rugged cliffs in a remote area of San Francisco Bay, two men were birdwatching. On the isolated beach below, they discovered the bruised, half-naked body of 17-year-old Kurt McFall. His father suspects foul play.
Kurt told this friend of his that he was involved in some kind of satanic cult and that he wanted out, but thought that they might try to kill him. And he really feared for his life. It was a murder. It needs to be investigated. There's no doubt in my mind that Kurt could have handled himself in that cliff area because he was an experienced mountain climber and he was a diver. So he would not have drowned in the water or fallen down the hill.
Kurt McFall, dead at 17. To outward appearances, Kurt was a handsome and popular high school student, a confident young man who made friends easily.
Tom McFall has learned there was another side to his teenage son. The day after Kurt disappeared, Tom received an anonymous telephone call telling him that his son had wanted to escape from a cult and that he feared for his life. Tom now believes that Kurt strayed from a suburban middle-class background into a world of witchcraft, mysticism, and possibly murder.
Alarmed by the strange phone call, Tom searched his son's bedroom.
After I had received the telephone call, I thought a lot about this individual as to what he knew about Kurt's disappearance. I wanted to gain all the information I could as to what happened.
In Kurt's room, Tom discovered a knife made from a deer's hoof, a necklace of stone and feathers, and drawings of witchcraft and violent fantasies. These seemed to be further proof that Kurt was leading a double life. At 10, he'd become interested in a medieval fantasy game, Dungeons and Dragons. It was the beginning of a voyage into a subculture that would dominate Kurt. A year before he died, Kurt joined the Society for Creative Anachronism, or SCA. Its members enjoy reliving medieval customs in the actual costumes of the period. Once a week, they practice jousting and sword fighting in the parking lot of an Oakland subway station.
Kurt was here about twice a week through February and into March of 1980. Learned how to fight. He was good, quick, talented. Really going to be very good at the game. We were real pleased with him. His death certainly had nothing to do with any part of his participation in the SCA that he about.
As Kurt became increasingly interested in medieval rituals, he joined a separate group who initiated him into pagan religion. One of Kurt's old high school friends feared this new group and contacted Tom McFall. He had become concerned for Kurt and now fears for his own safety.
Gradually, over a period of perhaps 6 months, his attitude towards other people changed drastically. He kind of moved from just studying with an interest in medieval religion to actually adopting that religion as his. He lost a lot of his friends through that process.
Mother of all, hail Earth, Mother of all, hail.
Kurt studied pagan religion with Gabriel Carrillo, who uses the ancient Welsh name Caradoc.
This is a religion which is also an art, a craft, which has techniques which are at their essence magical. I met Kurt because he had evinced an interest in magic. Kurt was real bright and real curious about just about everything.
His involvement with this group can be compared to a drug addiction, where you begin thinking that you've got it in control and you can take it when you want, but gradually losing that sense of knowing when to stop until you're a junkie.
We regard evil as a human phenomenon. I do not make any attempt to control people's lives. People are free to come and go at their own discretion, just as Kurt did. If anything, the emphasis that we have is on individuals taking control of their own lives.
Saturday, September 10th. Kurt had planned to spend the night at Karadic's apartment. They had dinner, went to a movie, and around midnight, Kurt went swimming at Ocean Beach, a few blocks from Karadic's home. Later, Kurt was restless and couldn't sleep. According to Karadic, Kurt knocked on his door about 3 in the morning.
It's too hot in here. I'm going to the beach.
Kurt was never seen again.
My best guess is simply that he took one too many chances. He might have gone swimming in the ocean and been pulled out by the undertow. He might have gone climbing on the cliffs at Land's End and slipped and fallen, or any one of a number of other things.
The following evening, Kurt's car was found, abandoned on a golf course overlooking the ocean. There were a number of puzzling clues. Kurt's driver's license was on the floor. His car keys were on the seat. A $20 bill was in the glove compartment. The prize suit of armor which Kurt had made for his SCA sword fighting was missing from the trunk. Most curious of all, there were beer bottles scattered in and around the car.
The car has to be a phony scene. To me, that was set up because Kurt did not drink beer. That's also inconsistent with the autopsy report that shows that there was no signs of alcohol or drugs on the body when it was recovered. So that looks very suspicious.
At 10:15 the following morning, National Park Service lifeguards recovered the body of Kurt McFall. It was lying in a cove less than 2 miles from Karadic's apartment, just below the cliffs at the golf course where Kurt's car was found.
When we came upon the body, we noticed it was in fairly good condition, fairly pale, usually a sign of being in the water for an extended period of time. No obvious external trauma. He looked pretty clean other than a few small abrasions on the body, but nothing obvious.
Kurt's body had no shoes, socks, or shirt. His back and shoulders were scored with cuts and abrasions, and strangely, the belt he wore was missing its buckle.
With the facts that we have in this case, it's really anybody's guess as to where he actually entered the water, where he came from. My guess would be, and that's all it is an educated guess, that he simply fell off the cliff. And that's what it appears to me.
The coroner's report determined that Kurt died from multiple traumatic injuries and severe blood loss. But no one knows what caused those injuries. Kurt may have drowned, but that would not explain his cuts and abrasions or the acute loss of blood. It appears that Kurt fell from the treacherous cliffs, but it is not known if he fell accidentally or if he was beaten and pushed.
I went to the San Francisco coroner, and I said, "What do you think happened to Kurt?" And he said, "I think the most probable cause of Kurt's death is homicide." But he said he didn't have enough to testify to that in a court of law, and so he sent it up to homicide, classified as unknown. And I can't accept that.
The San Francisco police declined to be interviewed. They investigated Kurt's death but found no evidence to classify it as a homicide. The case remains open, but there are no suspects. Although he has no proof, Tom McFall still believes his son was murdered.
Kurt may have uncovered something in the organization and may have indicated to people that he was going to expose this. And I feel that All of these things probably contributed to them to wanting to do away with Kurt.
My personal theory is that Kurt stumbled onto some information that he wasn't supposed to know about. These types of organizations don't make threats. They make actions.
If I wanted to murder somebody, the last person I would murder was would be somebody who was staying at my house and whose father knew that he was staying at my house. I mean, the whole thing is stupid. I understand that Kurt's father went through a great deal of pain about his death and needed to find somebody to blame. And I understand that I was a very convenient person for him to blame. But I had absolutely no responsibility for Kurt's death.
I'm so frustrated to have information that would indicate that your son has been murdered. And to date, they have virtually closed the case. I'm bound and determined to get an investigation. I think Kurt deserved this. He did not deserve to be taken in that manner.
Currently, Tom McFall is the only person investigating his son's death. If Kurt was murdered, he hopes that even now, 3 years later, someone will come forward with new information, new evidence that could reopen the investigation and provide peace of mind for himself and justice for his son. Next, the story of a mysterious bag of unopened letters dating back 40 years. They were written by GIs sailing off to battle in World War II and have yet to reach their lost loved ones.
Letters from home. Each day, millions of them are sent to American servicemen fighting on distant battlefronts. Because of a war postal system called V-mail, they can be flown throughout the world, reaching distant points safely and with amazing speed.
During World War II, thousands of soldiers said goodbye to their loved ones. And almost every GI made a parting promise that he would write home as often as possible. Their letters, carried by the military V-mail service, were the only link between them and their families. Some would return, others would not. For the relatives of those GIs lost in battle, the last letter home became a precious keepsake, a memory of lost love. "41 years after the war ended, on February 4th, 1986, Mike Mingus, a pest exterminator, was spraying the attic in an elderly woman's house in Raleigh, North Carolina. In the corner, he saw some letters spilling out of a laundry bag. Mike Mingus had in fact discovered a military duffel bag filled with hundreds of unopened letters written by soldiers during World War II.
The longer I looked, the more incredulous I became, really. There was just something about the insignia across them. I'd never seen V-mail before. I'd heard the term and knew that generally anything with V in it was World War II vintage. And it was really apparent from the very beginning that there was something here that was just really strange. I really think it'd be best if I took this mail to the proper authorities.
Mike learned that the elderly woman had a nephew who'd been a crew member aboard the SS Caleb Strong when it was bound for North Africa in May 1944. The troops on board had written 235 letters home and stuffed them into the duffel bag. The woman's nephew had vowed to mail them when he returned to the USA, but he'd forgotten. He died about 1980, and the woman had been too embarrassed to say anything. After promising never to reveal her name, Mike convinced this woman to release the letters to him. The letters were sent to Meg Harris of the Postal Service. 92 GIs on board the Caleb Strong had written letters to over 150 friends and family. One by one, the U.S. Postal Service delivered the letters from 89 of the soldiers. Only 3 could not be tracked down.
trying to locate a former private John J. Thomas.
You have to be real careful when you start telling them about this man. You kind of lead into it slowly because you don't want anybody to go into shock. And you feel a lot of the closeness of family ties. The whole experience has been one where you realize how much people care for each other and how much they continue caring even after 40 years.
Still at sea, May 1944. My precious wife, darling, I sure miss you. I wish I were back with you right now. It seems so hard to write you, as all I can think of is how I love you and long to be with you. The boat is rocking, so I can't write too neatly. Merrill, darling, I love you and hope that we'll soon be together for good. From what information we can gather, I believe the big invasion is on, so I'll be stuck overseas until the war is over. I love you, my darling. Your husband, Frank.
Merrill Page Rapley is a retired teacher who was married to Frank Rapley, a B-17 turret gunner. His plane was shot down over Austria in 1944. Merrill Rapley never remarried. She's been a widow for 44 years. Receiving Frank's last letter was a surprising and poignant moment.
I was shocked. It tore me all to pieces. And it was just as though we were there together, and just as though he was talking with me. And, of course, I guess I was more or less in a state of shock, but it was the most wonderful letter I had ever received from Frank, even though all of his letters were very dear to me. But after waiting that long and still being able, after 42 years, to get another letter from a man that I still love, that was just something that only the Lord can understand the depth of the meaning of it. The short 2.5 years I had with him was just equal to a lifetime for me. That's why I never did remarry. Nobody else could ever replace him. And I have every letter that he's ever written me. But this, above all, was the most special one.
Are you sweet? Just another line today, as I'm always thinking about you and may not be able to write for a few days. Haven't seen land yet, but expect you soon. There is about 6 hours difference in time here, so I often try to think of where you are and what you might be doing. Guess that is natural. Your ever-loving and faithful husband. And it's always touching. Can't help but think back all the time, you know.
Your ever-loving and faithful husband. Those were Staff Sergeant Sumter Grubb's last words to his wife Peggy, written on May 19th, 1944. Within months, Sumter was killed in combat, but his words would not die.
Tonight we've seen 4 mysteries. 4 true stories of people caught in the most extraordinary circumstances. For each mystery, someone, somewhere, knows the truth. Perhaps it's you.
This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Now, tonight, we'll examine 4 new mysteries. Each one has been recreated in detail, wherever possible using the actual participants in the hope that someone watching may know the truth. Join me. You may be able
February 19th, 1982. A quiet residential community in the small city of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. On this day 6 years ago, this peaceful New England town of 46,000 was stunned by the most savage murder in its history. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Doug Heath returned from work to his apartment on Providence Street. As he walked through the door, he found his neighbor's 3-year-old child locked out of her mother's apartment.
When I saw Nicole standing on the stairs, I knew immediately something was wrong. Where's Mommy? I asked her where her mother was, and she told me that she was downstairs lying down. I tried the door into the first floor apartment, their apartment, and it was locked. I knew something was wrong right there.
Doug went down to the laundry room to check on her mother, Susan Laferte.
I saw a body leaned up against the dryer. In the same instant, I turned to my left, and I saw Sue lying face down in a puddle of blood. It hit me right then and there that the murder or something really bad had happened.
When rescue arrived at the scene along with the first officers, they found that 2 women had been brutally assaulted in the basement area of the Providence Street home, and for all intents and purposes had been left for dead.
Terry, what do you have here?
One woman expired at the scene, and the other one was in very, very critical condition. Rescue stabilized her the best that they could and transported her from the scene to the hospital emergency room.
The 2 victims both lived in the apartment building on Providence Street. 22-year-old Doreen Picard was pronounced dead at the scene. The other woman, 27-year-old Susan Laferte, was barely alive. She was immediately rushed to the hospital. Susan was in surgery for 2.5 hours. While she clung to life, her husband Ernie waited and prayed.
The way they described it, she was hanging by a thread. Her injuries were so severe that it was touch and go at the time.
Miraculously, Susan survived, but she remained in a deep coma. Fearful for her safety, the police guarded her room around the clock.
It was obvious to us that the perpetrator, in his mind, had left both girls for dead. We immediately became worried that he would realize that there was a witness to the attack and that he would come back and try to eliminate that witness by killing her. We were hopeful that when she came out of the coma, she would be able to tell us who it was that had done this.
30 days later, Susan finally emerged from her coma, but she had no memory of her attack or her attacker. She developed total amnesia about what happened during the brutal assault in the basement. She'd also sustained injuries that have left her physically disabled. Susan's amnesia sent the investigation of this seemingly motiveless crime back to square one.
Everyone expected me to wake up and tell them who attacked me and killed Doreen. I don't know who attacked us. I have no idea.
Even now, Susan's family is concerned for her safety. and she has requested that she not be identified on camera.
When I woke up out of the coma, I would be able to tell them it's 5 years later, and I'm no closer at this period of time than I was 5 years ago. I don't know what he looked like or anything else about him. I have no memory whatsoever of the attack.
6 years later, the police are still searching for a motive. Susan Laferte was a housewife with 2 young children and was an active member of her neighborhood watch. Doreen Picard was studying for a career in childhood development. She lived upstairs in the apartment building that the Lafertes owned. Ironically, she was packing to move to a new building on the very day of the attack. Like Susan, Doreen's parents desperately want to find an answer as to who killed their daughter.
We go to bed thinking about her, and we wake up thinking about her. You know, we have to keep pushing and knocking on doors, because I feel like there's somebody out there that has the missing piece to that puzzle.
I have no recollection whatsoever of basically from New Year's Eve to the 19th of February. The 19th totally is a blackout.
On February 19th, the day of the attack, Susan had lunch with her sister, Carol Rivette. At 1:30, 2 friends came to the door.
Hi.
Hi, Don.
My sister came back from the doorway and stuck her head in the parlor and said, Carol, I'm going downstairs. I'll be right back. She came back upstairs and I could hear her talking to somebody in the doorway. So I got up to go see who she was talking to. Get hints from him. Hi. Yeah. Hi. I knew one of the guys, but the other guy I didn't know, and she introduced me to him. And this is the guy that's getting the
The 2 men then went to the basement to look at some puppies that Susan was selling. Susan talked to the men for 5 minutes, and they left. 10 minutes later, at 1:45, Carol went home. That was the last time anyone saw Susan before the attack. No one can be sure what happened that day between 1:45 and 3:20, when Doug Heath discovered Susan and Doreen's bodies.
Top you between the washer and the dryer.
Now you make it out.
All right.
I have to admit that I was shocked by the initial scene. The brutality of the assault. It was not just a murder. It was not just an assault. It was a frenzied attack. It was an overkill.
Okay, 15 lines. Okay.
Only one person, apart from Susan, saw the killer. Nicole, Susan's 3-year-old daughter, was in the apartment that afternoon. Her grandmother, Florence Laferte, tried to coax the details of the attacker's identity out of Nicole's memory.
As I came in the house, Nicole was there, and from the very beginning, she told me that she let him in. She thought that was her mother's friend.
Hi.
She saw the man. She says he was probably a little bigger than her father. He had a mustache. She even told me that he wore a cap with a visor towards the back. He had sneakers, and he also had jeans. When she heard her mother crying, she went downstairs, and as she was going down, he was coming up. He had a rag in his back pocket. It was red and white. She called it polka dots. And then she was locked out in the hallway while the man escaped through the front.
The killer left his murder weapon, a pipe, in the house as he left. It was not found for 4 days.
After the assault, Nicole was questioned extensively by the police department. As much as the police would like to have a person who definitely saw the perpetrator that day, her story has changed too much to be of real value to us. The stress and confusion that she was under at that point in time really made it very difficult to get a real solid, sure story. It's a complex case because of the different factors involved. First, we have 2 victims. And those victims all bring their individual traits with them. They have their own friends. They were involved in different things. There was also 2 newspaper ads that had been running. One was for puppies for sale, and the other was for an apartment for rent. The perpetrator might have responded to one of the ads, was a friend of either one of the victims or their family, or was just a total stranger.
Since the murder, Doreen's family has conducted their own informal investigation, which they believe has led to a series of anonymous phone calls.
Hello? A few months after Doreen was killed, I received a phone call about 2 a.m. He said that I should be concerned with my family and my children and not pursue the matter so hard. And for openers, they might burn my garage down, my repair shop. Every time we pursue the matter, we get phone calls. Obviously, we're putting somebody uneasy. We're keeping somebody off guard.
You know, it's like a nightmare because I'm watching over my shoulder all the time. And I'm very fearful because maybe someday this person's going to realize that, hey, maybe she can remember.
I still hope every morning when I get up that maybe today something will snap and it'll come back. But it's been 5 years and it's still not, I'm no closer now than I was 5 years ago. I'm hurt. I don't look over my shoulder when I do things, but I've always got this back thought, is he still there?
Next, the story of a man who makes his living by getting married over and over.
He is known as the Heart Attacker, and so far he has fleeced his many wives on over $1 million. New York City, 1981. Louis Carlucci arrived in the suburb of Forest Hills, carrying nothing but a garment bag with his one good suit in it. In an affluent community, he was a stranger, a man without a past. He found work as a short-order cook in a diner, but no one knew where he came from. In September 1981, Louis Carlucci met a 41-year-old woman whom we will call Barbara in a neighborhood bar.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
7 weeks later, he married her. What Barbara didn't know is that Louis Carlucci is a con man. He makes his living by stealing women's hearts, and then their money. Carlucci is suspected of marrying at least 9 different wives and fathering over 30 children around the country. He is said to have swindled his victims out of more than $1 million. Louis Carlucci is known as Con Juan, or the Heart Attacker.
When you try to explain to someone what happened, they look at you and say, well, how could you get taken like that? And then you find out there are 500 other people that were taken the same way, who were supposed to be as brilliant or smart.
Barbara was the only one of Carlucci's victims who had talked to us. She asked that she not be identified on camera, and at one time she feared reprisals from Carlucci.
But the fact that he's roaming someplace in the United States and getting away with this is a terrible thought.
Barbara's telling her story tonight because she wants to warn other women about Louis Carlucci. The police are convinced that Carlucci is perpetrating the same con game on some unsuspecting woman at this very moment. Tonight, we'll see exactly how Carlucci perpetrated his schemes, which the police call marriage swindles.
Carlucci usually finds his victims in restaurants and friendship clubs.
Excuse me. Hi.
I was out with a friend And we were sitting and having a drink, and he sent over drinks. And we got to talking. And that's how we first met.
All the time, and I know for a fact that I've never seen you in her before.
First impression when I first saw him, no style, no class. However, he was warm, very friendly. He had a good sense of humor. So I started dating him. I thought, well, he's a pretty nice guy. He told me he grew up in the Bronx, that he traveled a lot, that he was in the restaurant business, and he wanted to settle down, and that he could give me everything that anybody could really want. And I said, okay, the guy is pretty nice. I like him. I like his company. And I thought, well, why not?
With the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may now kiss the bride.
After a whirlwind courtship lasting only 7 weeks, Barbara married Louis Carlucci in a small ceremony at the bar where they'd first met. Immediately after the wedding, the relationship began to deteriorate.
It was like 90-something degrees Christmas Day because we went out.
He kind of jumped on me for talking to other people at the wedding, and he got very angry about the idea, possibly that we even got married.
After the honeymoon, they moved into an unfurnished apartment in New York where they lived out of suitcases. Carlucci would not let Barbara out of his sight and paid for their living expenses with Barbara's credit cards.
The change in his attitude and his personality shocked me because there were times when he was real nice, and then all of a sudden he'd flip and it would be like black and white. Jekyll and Hyde, I don't know how you want to put it. And then I got scared. I really got scared. Because I realized that aside from the fact that, you know, I didn't have what he thought I had, which was money, the man was very physical.
Ever pull that again?
I couldn't turn my head. He'd pull my hair. If I looked the wrong way, I'd get smacked. Of course, I couldn't talk to anyone at all. And if we were in a restaurant, I couldn't even order anything from the waitress because he felt like I was looking at the person to signal or whatever.
Can I get you some dessert?
No, thank you. Just a check.
Ma'am?
Just the check.
Carlucci continued to put the bite on Barbara. He used her credit cards up to their limit, emptied her bank account, and when they went out together, he always used Barbara's money. Carlucci bled Barbara dry.
I was just held captive, let's put it that way, for about 6 months. Did never let me out of his sight, not one time. I couldn't go to the bathroom without him being there. So I had no way of trying to contact anyone or telling anyone about anything. Caught me with the razor. I was going to cut my wrist because that was the only way I could get out. He knew that I was going to die, whether I did it myself or I would just waste away and die. So his reaction was, well, I may as well let you go because you're going to die.
On May 13th, 1982, almost 6 months after their wedding, Louis Carlucci left Barbara, having squandered all of her savings, a total of $20,000.
Now, as I understand,
Encouraged by her friends, Barbara filed charges with the police.
when Barbara first came to us and gave us information about Carlucci, we started our investigation and began to talking to quite a few people. To speak to these women was an eye-opener for me. Carlucci doesn't just leave physical and financial wreckage behind him. It's kind of a psychological scarring that you see. And how long was it between the time you were in... They feel embarrassed and ashamed, and they don't want their relatives and friends and co-workers to know about it.
I would like to see this man get caught. He doesn't belong out in society. And whether he'll hurt anybody very physically, I don't know. But he definitely has to be taken off the streets.
He travels all over. We've had him in California, Las Vegas, New Orleans, Florida, New Jersey, New York State. He moves around quite a bit. He's wanted for bigamy, grand larceny, and fraud. I'd be very surprised if at this moment Carlucci was not with a woman. I'm sure he's been dealing with maybe 10 or 15 women a year, at the very least, because he's not going to stop what he's doing. This is the way he makes his living.
Louis Carlucci has a dubious distinction of being captured twice, thanks to viewers' tips. After we first broadcast Carlucci's story, he was arrested in Nashville, Tennessee. He was extradited back to New York and later released on $1,000 bail pending trial. Once again, Carlucci disappeared. And once again, after we featured him on a second broadcast, a viewer's tip led to his arrest, this time in Los Angeles. In a moment, the story of a quiet church-going housewife who's accused of helping a convicted murderer escape from prison. In 1986, Diane Broadbeck, a 43-year-old housewife, lived in the small Pennsylvania town of Wellsville. She was a devout Christian and had been active in her local church for almost 20 years. On April 5th, 1986, Diane Broadbeck disappeared. A month later, Diane's abandoned car was found in a motel parking lot, 30 minutes from her home. In the trunk, the police found Diane's overnight bag. The same day Diane vanished, John Yount, a long-term inmate at a local prison, escaped. Yount was serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of an 18-year-old schoolgirl. At the exact time that he escaped, Diane Broadbeck was seen just 1/2 mile from the prison, driving along the same country road where John Yount vanished.
I don't know if Diane's alive. I hope she's alive. I really do. I believe, personally, that she is alive, and I think she is with John.
Neither John Yount or Diane Broadbeck have been seen for almost 2 years. The authorities believe Diane may have been Yount's accomplice, and her family is mystified as to why this apparently respectable and happily married woman should have vanished without a word. Was Diane kidnapped by a desperate prisoner, or was she a willing accomplice who helped a convicted murderer escape?
I know my daughter. She would not deliberately help a convicted murderer escape from prison. My daughter would not do this.
Yes, I think that my wife probably did help John Yount get out of jail under pressure. For what reason, I don't know. It's hard to say. She could have been threatened by John Yount. I don't know what happened. I really don't.
Diane Broadbeck and her husband Chester had 2 daughters and had just celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. Diane led a busy life. She had worked as a bank manager, avidly pursued an interest in psychology, and as one of her many community activities, wrote letters to prisoners who had no family or friends. In 1966, John Yount was a popular math teacher at the high school in Du Bois, Pennsylvania. On April 28, 1966, Yount offered a ride to Pamela Sue Reimer, one of his pupils, as she was walking home from school.
Need a ride? No, really, that's okay. I only live right up the road, right up here. Well, then hop in. I'll give you a ride. No, that's okay. No, I insist. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Later that afternoon, Pamela's school books were discovered beside the country road. In the nearby woods, searchers found her body. She had been beaten with a wrench, raped, and her throat had been cut. The next day, John Yount confessed to the murder of Pamela Sue Reimer. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. 16 years later, John began writing to Diane Broadbeck.
Hi, my precious lady. I wanted to be close to me so much today. I hope my enjoyment and adoration of you is an incentive to be the best you can. You are a classy lady. I miss you and love you, John.
Diane met John through a friend of hers who had been visiting John, and she was no longer able to do it. And Diane had been corresponding with prisoners in other states, and she thought this would be like a continuation of what she had been doing, and it would be a very fulfilling thing for her to do. She was just always thinking of other people. She really was a people person.
After 20 years behind bars, John Yount had become a model prisoner. He played organ for the choir, mastered computer programming, and taught in the prison school.
Around here, it was very easy for him to be liked, and he had a real good manner about him in terms of getting involved with people.
Okay, class, if you would, open your books to page 69, the bottom of the page.
John is a strong-willed person and very persuasive. I believe that he could probably persuade almost anybody, given the right opportunity and given the right time. He has a lot of skill in being able to manipulate people.
Diane began visiting Yount at the local jail and continued to see him even when he was transferred to Rockview Prison, over 2 hours away.
Diane came to see John Yount every week. She never missed. It was regular. It was just week after week. She was his girlfriend, definitely. It was not a casual visit like a brother and sister visiting. When they started their visit, they would embrace and kiss, and the same when they left, which is really all permitted during the visit.
I'm fine. I'm always fine when I see you.
You look great.
Diane Broadbeck fell in love with John Yount.
Wonderful when you're here.
I had no idea that they were romantically involved. It appeared to me that they were simply very good friends. She never confided in me if they were romantically involved.
Diane talked about John Yount. I know she was writing him. I know she visited him, which that's about all. It was just a little bit as far as I knew.
John Yount tried repeatedly to appeal his conviction. Finally, the United States Supreme Court denied Yount's request for a retrial. In February 1985, John Yount wrote Diane again.
Be my Valentine, love. Forever. You are my heart. I hope more than anything that this is the last Valentine Day that we will spend apart.
On April 5th, 1986, John Yount escaped. Yount's excellent behavior had earned him the right to work unsupervised outside the prison fence.
All right, John. The morning of the escape, John was to go out and cut some hay.
What all you have to do is take this hay wagon down to the garden barn, and I'll be back in a little bit.
He was told specifically by the supervisor what he was supposed to do, took the other men to their particular areas, and then made his rounds.
That was the last time John Yount was ever seen.
I was on the way up over Ritual Hill there, heading for the bowling alley. And I seen this car come down. I just casually looked over, and I thought, that girl looks familiar. Looks like John Yount's girlfriend. So I thought to myself, what is she doing on this road?
That was the last time Diane Broadbeck was ever seen.
Yes, sir. Broderick?
Yes, sir.
Sergeant Duggar from the Pennsylvania State Police. This is Trooper Robert Scudda.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to talk to you about John Yount and your wife. Are you familiar with John Yount?
When the troopers came to my door on Sunday, wanting to know where my wife was, saying that Yount had been broken out of prison by someone and thinking it was her, as far as I was concerned, they were completely wrong. She had nothing to do with it. I thought that she had gone to Williamsburg, Virginia, and I believed that until Monday or Tuesday when she did not return.
The police discovered that Diane had a secret bank account and had withdrawn $7,500 in the weeks just before she disappeared.
We discovered that she also placed a car into a used storage facility, and that car was placed in there within 2 weeks prior to the escape. And we discovered that there was telephone contact with John Yount between she and he at the prison. The night before the escape, there was a 14-minute conversation which occurred. At that point in time, we decided to file charges against her in assisting John Yount.
I do not believe that Diane deliberately helped a convicted murderer escape from prison.
She was a very moral person, and you just did not do certain things. She had a very strong code of ethics, and certainly helping a prisoner escape was not among them.
A month after the escape, Diane's car was found abandoned at a motel just 20 miles from her home. A bag was found in the trunk containing Diane's personal items, jewelry, cosmetics, and over a dozen pairs of underwear.
There is a theory that John used Diane as an instrument of his escape. He discovers that he is not going to get out of the prison system. He has a woman on the outside who can do things for him. She does them. He then kills her. He departs from the scene. He would be gone free and clear. The other theory is that she really loved him, and he really loved her. That theory is one that I hold. I believe she is with him.
Well, if my wife has run off with another man, it's for sure I do not like it. That's for sure, you know. We were married for 25 years, and I thought they were fairly good years, you know. And as I told many people, she didn't leave just me. She left the whole family. I don't think she's alive, because I think if she is, she would contact somebody in the family.
I will never even think that she is dead. I know she's alive. I think of nothing else but my missing daughter, and I want her back.
John Yount murdered a high school girl at one time. He flew off the handle at that time and could do it again. I think she should fear for her life. I think at some point in time, John can kill again.
Update. John Yount and Diane Broadbeck have been captured. Two of our viewers in Boise, Idaho, recognized Broadbeck as a former co-worker, Kathy Kerman.
When they showed the picture, it was Kathy's face, obviously. And once they said she was a bank manager and it was from Massachusetts, and they said that John's background was in computers, it was a dead giveaway.
The Humphreys called the FBI, and after a month-long investigation, the fugitive couple was arrested at their home.
He seemed a little surprised for a minute, then he put his hands up in the air. He didn't look around or anything, really. He just sort of, I think he had his eyes on the guy with the gun.
Next, the mystery of $21 million in gold and silver buried somewhere in Virginia. It has eluded treasure hunters for over a century.
I have deposited in the county of Bedford 5,100 pounds of silver and 2,921 pounds of gold, securely packed in iron pots with iron covers. No difficulty will be had in finding it.
In 1821, Thomas J. Beale wrote of an enormous fortune he buried in the hills of Bedford County, Virginia. According to legend, $21 million in gold, silver, and jewels. For over 100 years, treasure hunters have been combing the countryside looking for Beale's buried hoard. No one has found it.
The amount of gold and silver that was supposed to have been deposited in 2 deposits gave me an idea that you'd have to have 2 wagons or more to bury it.
There's pots, iron pots, with silver and gold in them, and coins. And I'm excited about getting down to where it's at.
Well, somebody will get lucky. Somebody will get lucky and find it by mistake, or they'll find it because they've really searched it out and know what they're doing. One way or the other, I think it'll be found.
The legend of Beale's fortune begins in the early 1800s in New Mexico. Thomas Beale and a team of 30 miners dug up gold and silver worth over $21 million at the day's prices. They brought the treasure to Virginia, where Beale buried it. He left written instructions to the location of his fortune in the form of 3 secret codes, or ciphers. Then he went back to New Mexico and disappeared. In 1869, a wealthy Virginian solved one of the 3 ciphers, using the Declaration of Independence as the key. He numbered the first letter of every word in the Declaration of Independence. Then for each number in the cipher, he substituted the corresponding letter. Decoded, the message read,
I have deposited in the county of Bedford in an excavation or vault 6 feet below the surface of the ground 5,100 pounds of silver and 2,900.
Beale then describes the treasure in detail.
Securely packed.
For over 100 years, the other 2 ciphers have remained unsolved. One lists Thomas Beale's associates and heirs, and this one pinpoints the exact location of the treasure. Whoever decodes it may find Beale's fortune stored in a secret vault roughly the size of 2 Rolls Royces. In this next mystery, we'll join several treasure hunters, some of whom say they have broken the cipher. They are convinced that sooner or later, someone will strike it rich.
2 brothers, Eddie and Joe Toney, and their father-in-law Earl Boggs have spent 9 years searching for the treasure. They say they have broken the cipher, and that the message tells of 5 geographical points where 167 years ago, Thomas Beale left the clues, which one by one will lead to his fortune. The Toney brothers are currently looking for the 5th and final point, which is the clue that will lead them to the vault.
We only have one more point to go, and we've verified each place we found something that he left. And degrees and the footage and paces came out exactly. If we can't find this 5th point after finding 4, there's something bad wrong. I'm confident that we'll find it.
Stop.
The Toney brothers believe this 19th century carriage rod is the 5th clue in their search. They think that it was purposefully buried by Beale, pointing in the direction of his secret vault.
We know what the last degree is to go. I'm a little shaky right now on account of it because I know there's not enough time today to go do it. Well, when the metal detector went off, I got excited, and it's hard to explain how exciting you do get. And you imagine a gold down in there behind them rocks, and my heart felt like it come up in my throat.
Meanwhile, miles away in a completely different section of Bedford County, Wilbur Swift from Garden Grove, California, is also searching. He believes that he, too, has broken the cipher and has spent the last year and $20,000 trying to find the Beale treasure.
I'm a computer programmer to start with, so on my own personal computer, I decided to try to decipher this. In about 8 months' time, I was able to break the code. And it told me about a specific type of rock that I was looking for, and I happened to locate that specific type of rock, and there it is right there. It has a face on it, and it has a head on it. This is what the deciphered code told me to look for. And then I said, okay, the treasure has to be underneath it because it said that's where it was supposed to be.
Wilbur hired a local contractor, Ken Dooley, to help him excavate under the rock.
I've lived in Bedford County all of my life, and over the past 25 years, I have dug this treasure up here for about 20, 25 people. Most of them knew exactly where it was, and when talking to them, it'd be so uptight they just couldn't hardly breathe, really. And when you start digging for them, there was always just 2 feet away from it. I don't care how deep in the ground you went, it was 2 feet deeper than what you dug.
The target was pre-measured at 26 feet, and we're down right now at about 24 feet, so we don't have too much further to go. Now that we've found the rock, and we've done some extensive testing, by the way, and we're sure that we're getting the treasure out of there.
I've been native here for 50 years, born and raised here. They've searched and searched, and I haven't seen anybody come up with anything yet.
Bedford County's local residents have seen diggers come and diggers go, empty-handed. They're not convinced there really is a treasure.
It may be here, or may be sitting on it. I've got some land in Thaxton over. It may be on my spread. I don't know. I hope it is.
I think it's an outside possibility. It might be a treasure somewhere yet, but I don't think they're not believe enough in it to go up and start digging.
They think they can break that code. Maybe they can. I hope them good luck. But personally, I just don't believe it's here.
How are we doing, Carl? Oh, we're doing very well. I'm down to the 19th line.
Could the Beale ciphers be a hoax? A computer pioneer, Dr. Carl Hammer, has spent 30 years studying Beale's numbers to determine if there truly is a coded message. As part of his investigation, he attempted to recreate the conditions under which Beale wrote the cipher in his computer lab.
My aim was to find out whether the ciphers are real or whether they're a hoax. Hoax means these are random numbers, they're doodles. And so I started to analyze the numbers. And I discovered that there were some very distinguishable patterns, and they were in fact not random numbers, they were not doodles, but they contained information. We don't know what the information is, but they are a legitimate set of cryptographic numbers. And that is all that is known to this date.
Even though he has lost his job and is now living in a nearby motel room, Wilbur Swift is still digging at the bottom of his 25-foot shaft. So far, he has found nothing.
My wife is back in California, and some neighbors say, hey, where's Wilbur? And I don't think any of them take it serious. Well, he who laughs last best. And I believe that one of these days I might get the last laugh.
The Tony brothers believe they will have the last laugh. They still haven't found the treasure, but they do believe they have located the final clue. While we were filming, they had to return home after running out of money, but they will be back.
The facts that we've got, I know it's not a hoax. You know, I'm convinced that it's not. It's been there 160-some years, supposedly, and it's going to be there until it's found.
In spite of all the computer programs, historical research, digging, and searching, Thomas Beale's secret vault, if it exists, remains intact. The residents of Bedford County have played host to treasure seekers for nearly a century and have asked us to remind everyone that unauthorized digging is against the law.
Tonight we've examined 4 mysteries, and at the heart of each is a secret. A secret kept hidden by amnesia, by a con game, by a prison escape, and by a code. Perhaps someone, somewhere can unlock these secrets. Perhaps that someone was watching. Perhaps it's you.
This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Tonight on Unsolved Mysteries, the story of a lonely housewife in Maine who searched for love in her newspaper's personal columns. 2 years ago, she went on a blind date and vanished. And on the Queen Mary, dozens of eyewitnesses claim they have seen or heard ghosts. Last month, parapsychologists tape-recorded phantom sounds of what some believe is a shipwreck that took place 40 years earlier. We'll also examine the case of a man awaiting trial for the murder of 2 teenage girls. Joe Shepard has escaped. Perhaps you can help catch him.
Tonight's cases feature ordinary people thrust into a vortex of mystery, heartbreak, and intrigue. Each one is searching for that vital clue to end a story that so far has no ending. Perhaps you can help. Join me. You may be able to help solve a mystery.
This is the Queen Mary, now permanently moored in Long Beach, California. On her decks and in her corridors, people have seen and heard things they can't explain.
I'd been here about 14 years when I'd first had the first experience with actually seeing what I thought to be a ghost. It was a December morning. I was in the work area, and for some reason I picked up a cup of coffee, went out to the table, and there was a lady sitting there. I was so fascinated by her dress. She appeared to be in a late afternoon cocktail-type dress from the 40s. She had dark hair rolled at the sides, no makeup on. She seemed to be very pale, but I never saw a movement. I left the table, went up about 10 feet, turned around because I wanted to take another look, and there was nothing there.
I am probably the last person that should have had these experiences because I'm such a skeptic. One day I was standing on the stairs of the pool, and out of the corner of my right eye, I saw a woman, probably in her 60s or 70s, in black and white. So I went down the stairs and around the pillar expecting to find her standing there, and she wasn't anywhere to be found. It was only a matter of seconds she couldn't have gone anywhere.
Several others besides Carol and Nancy say they have seen or heard ghosts here in the Queen Mary's first-class pool. How do we explain these sightings by reportedly well-balanced, level-headed people? Could they simply result from the power of suggestion, stimulated by an eerie location? Some parapsychologists believe that all locations are haunted. That is, they retain memories of past events, as some people with psychic sensitivities, or ESP, experience as hauntings. Whatever the explanation, the Queen Mary seems to be inhabited by something ethereal that has been seen and heard, but not explained.
Oh, I'm happy and gay, 'cause I'm sailing away.
The Queen Mary took her maiden voyage on May 27, 1936, and transported the titled and elite from both sides of the Atlantic.
The Queen Mary, how'd you like to come with me?
During that 5-day voyage, the Queen Mary was a floating party, a living symbol of luxury travel.
A British crew, so when I go over the sea, the Queen Mary takes me.
In the Second World War, the Queen Mary was turned into a troop ship. Due to her ghostly gray camouflage, she was ironically nicknamed the Gray Ghost. After the war, she reverted back to her former glory and crossed the ocean a total of 1,001 times. In the over 30 years the ship was at sea, she witnessed 4 births and at least 49 recorded deaths. After her arrival in Long Beach in 1967, one of the first people to work on board was Marine Engineer John Smith.
Part of my duties was to check and learn this ship thoroughly, and so I explored it in the evenings when my regular day's work was done.
His job took him into the remote regions of the ship's bow, and several times over a 2-month period, he heard something where there should only have been silence. He heard the sounds of metal tearing, water rushing, and then men screaming.
It sounded like there had been a rupture of the ship's hull. It was frightful. I went up to the extreme bow section of the ship. The sound was here, but there was no water. Had nothing to cause it. I don't believe in supernatural things, but in all my experiences as a marine engineer, I've never seen anything like this.
Years later, Smith read about a wartime tragedy, the Queen Mary's accidental collision with a British cruiser named the Kurosawa. Over 300 men were killed. The Queen Mary's bow sliced the Kurosawa in half.
After I read that article, I was so shook up and so overwhelmed. The very area I heard that mysterious water rushing was this exact same area that was damaged when the ship hit the Curacao. I said, this is what it would have sounded and felt like if I had been in that compartment at the time. But I knew it couldn't be. That was 30 years earlier. It couldn't be anything.
Over the years, dozens of sightings have been reported. Late one night, in the pool area, maintenance supervisor Kathy Love and a co-worker heard mysterious sounds.
Okay. After that, we came into the pool, and I heard giggling, sound of a little girl or a child playing in the area. And at that point, I noticed there was splashing. The splashing stopped, the giggling continued, and we observed the footprints of a small child walking across into the locker room. I know that I saw what I saw. I'm not sure exactly why I saw it, but I know it was there.
Several unexplained encounters have occurred in Shaft Alley, deep within the ship, near the engine room. Here, in 1966, during a routine fire drill, a man named John Pedder was crushed to death in a watertight door. Some believe Pedder still haunts Shaft Alley.
What'd they say he was?
It was down here in Shaft Alley somewhere.
Both tour members and employees have experienced hauntings in Shaft Alley.
Blue coveralls and a beard?
Yeah, said he was dressed in blue coveralls and he had a beard. There was 2 different tour groups that said it.
I had a second experience down in Shaft Alley. It was about 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the evening. I was working in the capacity of a lead guide, which meant my job was to close down the tour route and make sure that there weren't any stragglers behind. And I don't know why I turned around, but I turned around, and standing right behind me on the step was a man. He had blue overalls. They were dirty. When I stepped aside to let him go by, he wasn't there. He was gone. I don't necessarily believe any other ghost stories that other people have come up with. I only know what I saw, and I only believe what I saw with my own eyes.
Last month, Unsolved Mysteries brought to the Queen Mary a team of experts who've spent decades investigating hauntings. Using sophisticated recording equipment, they would attempt to verify the eyewitness accounts.
Head out, and as soon as I got around the corner, it started in again. He came in here and he came out as well.
Danish-born William Roll is one of the world's leading authorities on poltergeists.
I'm often asked the question, do you believe in ghosts? And what I expect I will be asked, when I finish this investigation, are there ghosts on this ship? And these are questions that I cannot answer.
No, absolutely not.
Tony Cornell has researched paranormal activity for 25 years.
I am a skeptic, but at the same time I must allow for the fact that other people who are very sane and sensible have seen things and experienced things. The apparitional stuff, I think, is probably the most interesting. The stuff in the pool and the stuff in Shaft Alley look as if they are repeated cases so often that they must be genuine.
Cornell set up his surveillance equipment. William Rowe led a team of psychics on board. All 6 claimed to know nothing about the ship's history or about the haunting occurrences. Armed with maps and their psychic sensitivity, they struck off in many different directions, alone. After this search, the psychics gathered together to compare notes. Though some had nothing to report, others sensed a great deal of activity that coincided with eyewitness reports.
The bow of the ship. Did you mention something about a collision or something like that?
Yeah, I felt a collision.
I see.
I felt the impression of a collision.
I see.
You know the history of the Queen Mary?
No.
Sure.
I don't.
Yes.
But I definitely felt the movement of the ship,
Mhm.
and I felt the jerking hit and the sensation through the body, and I did hear footsteps.
I see. Well, let's go to the next one.
In Shaft Alley, one psychic sensed a 20-year-old tragedy.
Janice, would you describe your experiences in that area?
I felt that there had been, not that I was hearing it physically, but that at times someone could hear a very rhythmical banging, as if someone had a wrench or a large piece of iron banging against a wrench.
A wrench?
A wrench. That was the...
Not a hammer?
No, it would be a wrench. Someone had apparently gotten trapped.
It is a fact that some psychics manage to pick up things, and you can't quite see how they got it. But you've got to be suspicious about this, because there's a thing called feedback. I mean, I've met enough mediums now who've read what they want to tell you in the newspaper.
One investigator did find something. While William Roll was surveying the bow area, he heard some unusual sounds he couldn't explain.
There was the sound two men talking. And it was heard by the security guard who brought me there and by myself. And it seemed to come from the lower levels of the bow of the ship.
You getting any sounds of...
In 30 years of investigation, this was the first time that Roll had heard an unexplained sound that had been reported by a witness. In this case, he believes what he perceived was genuine. Roll placed a voice-activated tape recorder in the bow area at the same spot where the voices were heard.
It's 3:15 a.m.
For most of the night, this is what was recorded. Nothing. In the early morning, for a full 2 minutes, the tape recorder picked up sounds where no sounds should be. This is a condensed version of the actual tape. Earlier, the bow had been sealed off. The researchers attempted to duplicate the sounds through mechanical means. They were unsuccessful.
What we can conclude is that there is a physical source for the sounds. Now, is it parapsychological or does it have some other kind of source? And that still remains uncertain.
Man has had this kind of experience as long as recorded history. It is a human experience. It's going to continue going on, and somebody's got to look at it. It's a challenge, and it's a mystery that has got to be solved.
What can explain these hauntings? Overactive imagination? A quest for publicity? Or something more intangible? Something supernatural? Is the Queen Mary haunted? We cannot say yes, but we cannot say no. February 27th, 1978, Tellico Plains, Tennessee. In a parked car, 16-year-old Roxanne Woodson fought off the advances of a man named Joe Shepard. Two friends watched from the back seat. Roxanne escaped and ran off into the night. Joe chased after her. Roxanne never returned. When Roxanne failed to come home, her family began to worry.
You just wring your hands and there's no outlet. There's no relief because you haven't got her. She's gone. You don't know what's happened to her. And she's out there and you can't reach her. And you can't help her.
After 10 years, the case of Roxanne Woodson still haunts her family and everyone living in Tellico Plains, Tennessee. For weeks, there was no trace of Roxanne. And as her investigation unfolded, the police became convinced that the last person who saw her, Joe Shepard, was a psychopathic killer. The night after Roxanne Woodson was reported missing, police went to the home where Joe Shepard lived with his parents to take him in for questioning. The officers waited while Joe went into his bedroom to put on his boots.
DA just wants to talk to him.
Well, what does he want to talk to him about? Joe's talked to him over and over again.
Joe reached for a shotgun.
You got a gun, babe?
The officers fired 2 warning shots. After a brief struggle, they wrestled the gun away from him. He was then brought in for interrogation.
When was the last time you saw Roxanne Woodson?
Joe's initial story was that he had attempted to seduce Roxanne, and she had gotten mad at him at his persistent efforts and had jumped from the car and run into the woods, that he went running after her. And finally Joe came back telling the 2 boys that he had tried to get her back and that he didn't know where she'd gone.
Joe Shepard was booked for assaulting a police officer, made bond, and was released. For several days, over 60 people combed through the woods looking for Roxanne. Joe voluntarily joined them. The police brought in dogs to follow Roxanne's scent into the woods. They tracked her only a few yards, and then the trail abruptly stopped. Still, the searchers found no trace of Roxanne, and the girl's family began to panic.
We just fell on our knees and said, oh, God, no, oh, God, no, not her. She loved her daddy so much, and he knew she would not have ran off.
After a few frustrating days, the search was called off. Roxanne Woodson had vanished. Until the afternoon of April 8th, 1978.
Roxanne's body was found after Joe's mother was standing at the window in the kitchen looking out, and she noticed that the dogs were digging and going on at one specific location there. And she became alarmed. She went outside and walked up on what proved to be two hands sticking out of the ground.
Oh! Louis! Louis! Louis!
She notified the authorities at that time, and they came to the Shepherd home and did remove the body of Roxanne Woodson from Joe Shepherd's mother and father's yard.
Roxanne had been buried in a shallow grave. Some of her clothes were missing, and her pants had been wrapped around her head.
At that point, the Monroe County Sheriff's deputy took out a warrant charging the suspect, Joe Shepherd, with first-degree murder.
We went to his mother-in-law, ex-mother-in-law's home to conduct a search, and they told us he wasn't there. We went in and searched the house and found him. There was a child in the bed, and he was rolled up in the covers under the foot of the bed, like the cover was just rolled down to the foot of the bed. He was hidden in there.
Joe, look at me. We found Roxanne, Joe. We found her, Joe. Look here, Joe. Found her buried in your front yard. Look at him, Joe. We found her buried in your yard.
During his second interrogation, Joe's story began to change.
Come on, Joe. Just tell us the truth what happened to her.
Joe began to fill in the blanks of the statement that he had earlier given, and he said that when Roxanne ran from the car and into the woods, he gave chase, and that as she was running through the woods, that she had fallen and struck her head.
Roxanne. She'd hit her head or something. I come up on her and I tried to revive her. I thought maybe she was just knocked out.
He told investigators that he panicked and returned to his car and companions. They left the area. Joe claimed he returned to the scene later that same night. Unsure whether Roxanne was dead or alive, he carried her back to his car. He placed the girl inside and drove off into the night.
I didn't do nothing to her. All I did is I figured, you know, something could happen to her out there, an animal or something, so I thought, I'll bury her. That's what I'll do. So I did. I took her back to the house and buried her.
According to Joe Shepherd, not knowing what to do with in his previous encounters with the law, he was afraid to contact any law enforcement. So then he decided to bury her, and he could find no other place other than his residence there in Tellico Plains. He never did actually admit to being responsible for her death. He admitted he had been with her and that she had died as a result of some sort of head injury that she had attained when she fell.
As a result of your investigation...
Joe was brought before a judge. He recommended that Joe be formally charged with the murder of Roxanne Woodson.
Bound to the grand jury, bond is set at $150,000.
As the Roxanne Woodson story began to draw to a close, another murder case was about to be reopened.
After Joe had been charged in regards to the homicide, the investigators who had talked with him and questioned him, they became pretty much buddies. Joe had learned to trust these people, and he wanted to help them.
Is there any way you can help us out?
Detective Joe Graves had received an anonymous phone call linking Joe to another disappearance, that of a girl named Kathy Clowers, a local 14-year-old who had vanished 2 years earlier.
I can take her to the last place I saw her.
I need you to take us and show us where she is now. Can you do that?
Yeah, I can take you there.
Joe told them that not only did he know Kathy Clowers, but he knew where she was buried. He offered to take them there.
About a half mile.
We went into the woods, probably a couple of 100 yards off of the highway. Joe had designated a spot where we ought to dig. We had taken along a pickaxe and shovel and such and started digging in the ground. We'd gone down some depth and hadn't uncovered the body at all. I took the pickaxe just to sort of relieve the guy who had been doing the digging, and after about the second effort, a piece of red cloth came up on the head of the pickaxe. I'll never forget Joe Shepard was hunkered down beside the hole we were digging, and he looked up with this cold smile on his face and said, "See, I told you so." He was proud, I think, of the fact that he had produced a body for us, and showed no emotion at all.
Though the body was badly decomposed, Dr. William Bass, a noted forensic anthropologist, was able to identify it as that of Kathy Clowers.
Looks to be fairly young, maybe mid-teens.
Kathy Clowers had chipped a tooth, and this matched the chipped tooth that she had.
Dr. Bass, is there anything that indicates the cause of death?
There was no evidence on the skeleton of cause of death. There were no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no broken bones. Whatever caused death did not leave its mark on the skeleton.
The clothing of this girl, a pants leg had been wrapped around her head, very similar to the manner in which the Woodson child had been buried. There had been a pants leg wrapped around her head.
On April 17, 1978, Joe Shepard was formally indicted for the murder of Kathy Clowers. While awaiting trial for the double homicides, Joe was held at the Bradley County Jail. On July 17, 1978, one of the jailers was summoned to a cell near Joe's.
What's the matter with you, boy?
The jailer was lured into the cell by a man feigning sickness.
What's your problem? I don't know, I'm sick. You make a move and I'll shoot.
After locking up the jailer, the two men went to Joe Shepard's cell. They released him, and the three men fled the prison. While the other two escapees were recaptured the following week, Joe Shepard remains at large.
I feel certain that Joe is a danger to society. The methodology that he put into each act was that of a very criminal mind, a mind that feels no guilt, or he is just there and he's capable of doing it at any time. We don't know what sets him off.
I would like to see him brought to justice. I'd like to see justice done for personal reasons and for the love of my granddaughter. I would like to see it, but also for the mothers out there that their daughters might be in danger.
These pictures of Joe Arlen Shepard were taken in 1978. He is 6 feet tall and weighs about 150 pounds. He has brown hair, a scar on his left forearm, and he may be working as an auto mechanic. Shepard has recently been seen in El Paso, Texas, and the authorities believe he may be living somewhere along the Mexican border. Update. London, Ontario, Canada. The 10-year search for Joe Shepard has ended.
After the Unsolved Mysteries show on October the 5th, we received a phone call from a local resident saying that he believed the guy called Shepard was in fact living in London under the name Joseph Tripp. We began an investigation And when we had identified him to our satisfaction as Shepard, he was arrested.
At the time of his arrest, Shepard was living in a government housing project in London, Ontario, with his common-law wife and their 2 children.
It seems apparent that Mr. Shepard was in London, Canada, just within a matter of days after his escape from Bradley County.
Wiscasset, Maine. A picturesque town of 3,000 people. Each year, vacationers come here to escape. But for Gail Delano, who lived in Wiscasset, this vacation paradise was a prison. She wrote about it in her diary.
Maine seems to bring out the worst in me. I don't see an end to my loneliness. It just seems to go on forever. I need someone so desperately, but nothing seems to work.
Gail Delano was twice divorced and the mother of 2 teenage boys. She looked for companionship in the personal ads of her local newspaper. When she placed the ads, she described herself exuberantly.
Unique female, 34. Attractive, trim, intelligent, affectionate, independent, slightly crazy night owl. Likes music, movies, dance, dining. Seeks easygoing, intelligent, responsible, not overweight male for growing relationship. I'm in Wiscasset. Where are you?
On June 21st, 1986, Gail Delano drove alone to a restaurant in Brunswick, Maine, to meet a blind date. Gail's family never saw or heard from her again. Despite the tone of her personal ads, Gail Delano was shy and withdrawn. For Gail, placing these ads was an act of courage. It was also an act of hope. The last entry in her diary read, "It would be nice to find someone to date over the summer. Who knows? Maybe I'll get lucky and find someone interesting." Gail was searching not only for companionship, but also for a father figure for her 2 boys. Her desperate need to find love placed her in the center of an unsolved mystery. Friday evening, June 20th, 1986. Gail's sons recalled that she had a 2.5-hour telephone conversation with a man named John, a man they assumed their mother had met through the personal ads.
Mom, this isn't like you.
Well, I'm in a pretty good mood today.
Really? Why?
Got a call from John last night?
The next morning, Gail told her son she planned to have coffee with John at the Howard Johnsons in Brunswick. And then, if things went well, spend the afternoon with him.
Be good while I'm gone.
That night, Gail's 13-year-old son Ryan returned home from a friend's house. He discovered that his mother was not at home.
Mom?
Ryan was concerned but not alarmed.
Mom?
When Gail did not return home the next night, her family called the police.
And Fort Brunswick.
It was now 37 hours from the time Gail Delano had left home to meet her date. The police immediately searched the Howard Johnson's parking lot and located Gail's car.
There was no indication at that point that there was any foul play. Basically, it was an adult woman who has gone out and spent the night. The history we got was that that's not unusual for her to spend the night out, although it was unusual for her to do it without calling.
You know, when she'd been gone that long, it just wasn't right, because she was so careful about keeping track with the children where she was, that we knew if she'd been gone for that long, that something was haywire.
Gail's family was forced to wait until 11 o'clock Monday morning to have her officially declared a missing person. Only then could the police search her car.
When we got the car open, we tried to see if there would be a note or anything that would be from Gail that would explain particularly who she was with, because at this point we figured this guy that she had to date with had done something.
Is there anything in there?
No, it's pretty clean.
And we looked the car over and there was nothing in the car.
Normally I know the person's first and last name and where he's from, but this one time we just missed the one, had to be that one time. I'd spoken with her earlier that afternoon, and she said, I have a feeling I'm going to have a date, I'm going to do something happy, and I'm going to have fun this weekend. And then, look what happened.
2 hours after the police had removed Gail's car, a Howard Johnson's busboy made a startling discovery.
The manager of Howard Johnson called the Brunswick Police Department to notify them that one of their busboys had found a set of keys in the parking slot where Gail Golino's car had been parked prior to their moving it.
When the policeman handed those keys, he said, are these Gail's keys? And I said, oh, my God. I said, they'd have to kill her short of getting those keys from her. And I just about came unglued then, and I guess I said to Platt, you've got to find my baby. Where is she? Where is she?
2 weeks later, a 9-year-old boy playing on the other side of the Howard Johnsons made a second startling discovery: Gail's purse.
Finding the purse at the parking lot kind of raised our concern about the possibility of foul play.
I was just heartsick when I found out, because, again, she would not let go of that handbag, short of being bopped in the head or dragged away.
See what we can find in there, maybe that might help us.
Actually, the pocketbook was very neat inside and quite orderly. So it appeared right from the beginning that it had not been rifled through by anybody looking for any type of money or things of this nature.
Curiously, while the purse appeared untouched, there was no money in it.
Folding wallet with...
Even the emergency $5 bill that Gail always kept tucked in a secret compartment was missing.
Further later on.
Using a date book they found in her purse, Detectives Mallett and Bradford compiled a list of the men that Gail might have dated in the last year.
June 20th. The last entry in there is John called, talked 2.5 hours.
One of them was a man named John from Old Orchard Beach.
You have any kind of quarrel with her?
This man swore he had never dated Gail. He said the only time he might have talked to her on the phone was months before she disappeared.
Not really, it wasn't arranged.
He had a rock-solid alibi for the day Gail vanished. So did all the other men the police questioned.
You're next.
The police were totally baffled. Gail kept detailed records of the men who responded to her ads. Yet there was no record of a man named John in her files. Who had called Gail and talked for 2.5 hours the night before she disappeared?
Yeah, right.
Why were her keys found in exactly the spot where her car had been parked? Why was Gail's purse found on the other side of the restaurant, apparently untouched, but with no money in it? Were the keys and purse thrown where they lay by someone who attacked Gail? Or is it possible Gail placed the keys and purse herself?
2:35 this Sunday morning, Chris Roy.
A new theory about Gail's disappearance emerged when police interviewed a local late-night disc jockey.
We're at WIGY. I was working the overnights at this radio station, and Gail would call sometime after 1 o'clock in the morning just to talk and go on in general about life experiences. Gail, how are you? And then Gail finally asked if I would like to meet her. What have you been up to? Gail always seemed to be very, very sad or depressed, almost to the point of not being able to move. Always you felt that Gail was just going to perhaps give up at any moment, just cease to exist, disappear literally, right sitting there on the couch.
For years, Gail had struggled with depression and had been on medication for it. Several times she had considered taking her own life and had talked about it with her sister. Gail's family reluctantly considered whether her disappearance might have been a suicide.